Howdy y'all, it's Jamie. It's been a minute. I haven't been recording a whole lot of videos. I actually missed the 11-year anniversary of this world. The 14th, August 14th of 2014 was when I created this world, so it is officially 11 years old at this point. I've been on it since I was in seventh grade, so I would have been 13 when I started it. I'm 24 now. I wanted to show off a few of the things before we get to the main subject of the video. I wanted to show off some of the things that I've been doing. I finally finished the book factory. So, you know, that machine that I showed off that made the noise when you turn on the machine. It kind of sounds like something's whirring, like gears or whatever, or like pipes. And I've got all three of the machines that I showed off in that one, whichever video it was, I don't really remember. But all those prototypes, I set them up in here, and so now we've got a full-fledged factory. I can make as many books as I want. I've got book and quill, so I can write stuff down, and I love writing stuff down because world building is a big part of what keeps me playing this game. I really love the creativity of that. This is the boiler room, by the way. This is where all the redstone is. I like to make my redstone rooms pretty. I know some people like to hide it away, but I like to keep it. I like to show it off. I use anywhere I've got redstone dust or, like, you know, something that could break off, I put polished granite underneath it, because that's the only block that I don't really actually use very often, like cosmetically. So if I'm digging around for whatever reason and I run into polished granite, I can be like 90% sure that there's redstone on top of it, and I need to avoid mining through that, otherwise I'm going to break something. I remember that was something that was a trick I learned from watching Etho back in the day, Etho's lab. He used to use stone brick for a while, and that always confused me, because I was like, you use that everywhere. Like, that's like the most common building block. And then at a certain point he started using cyan clay, which was, I guess, better. I don't know if he still does that. I haven't actually, I mean, I still do watch his videos a whole lot, but I don't think I've paid much attention to whether he has a specific block that he uses for. Anyway, I'm getting off track. I need to show off the rest of the. I put in street lights. I don't know if I mentioned that. I was getting tired of the torches. I built a path to go over the huge cow pit over here. That's where I get all the leather for the book factory. I built another tenement building, and then off over in the west I built some like just small little houses. I want to build a few of them up here. I want kind of the outskirts of the city to feel like, you know, you're trailing off into like the rural area. I think that would be kind of cool, because right now it's just kind of like, you know, like the city just starts out of nowhere, and there's no, like, it's not really a gradual movement in. So I'd like to maybe do that. I'm having a lot of fun over here. This one, I think I didn't show it off in the last video, but I've got this church here, and I finally actually wrote the book on the what do you call it, the altar, the podium there's a word for it. I didn't go to church growing up, so I don't know what it is. The place where the preacher stands. But I've got, you know, the book is there now, and it's pretty cool. This is the book. I made a video a few weeks back. It was a real artsy fartsy sort of video. I had the Dark Souls 2 soundtrack going over it, and I was reading this story that I had written, and it's a story that I've had for a while, but I had actually sat down and translated the whole thing into my conlang, and I wanted to show off not just the story itself, but also the language. I guess this is like Northern Jepler dialect, I'm pretty sure. I think that's what I spoke in the video. It was a real fun project, didn't get a whole lot of views, but I kind of wanted to do something similar for this video, because I had written something similar. I hadn't translated it yet, but you know, I figured people aren't really watching that kind of stuff, and it would be a little bit confusing and a little bit cryptic. And that particular video was pretty cryptic. I think it was a little bit confusing. It was loosely based off a role play that me and my younger sister would do way back in the day when I was still like in middle school, because you know, I've had this world since I was 13, right? And I was still living with my folks, so my younger sister could join on like a LAN connection, and so there were times where like both of us would play on this world like it was a multiplayer server, even though it was like my single player world. And I was very like protective of my of the things that I had built, and so I would like, you know, I'd keep a close watch on her, and I was like the king of the city, and so we would kind of compete over things, and I'd pretend that, you know, oh gosh, she's trying to usurp me. And so it was a fun little role play that we had, and so I wrote a story, and I had been trying to write a story based off of that would kind of retcon a lot of the things that I had built in my first city, which is I don't know if I'll ever show that off. I haven't touched that city in years. I've kind of moved on from it. I don't see myself really ever going back to it. It was kind of I built walls all the way around it. Kind of just said, you know, like I'd like to work on some new stuff now, I guess. But anyway, that's enough of that. Without yapping your ear off too much. The thing that I really wanted to talk about in this video is that particular video, the artsy fartsy one. I had mentioned Nameless Village is what I called it in the title card, I think. And that is this village up here. This is a slightly older village that I started, I think, probably sometime during the pandemic. And it's got, well, I call it Nameless, but it's more appropriate to call it maybe like the Village of Many Names, because I've got a lot of different things that I tend to call it, and depending on like when I introduced this village to someone, they'll know it by a different name, and that's not because I'm being indecisive. That's actually a conscious world building decision, because I'm very fascinated by instances of that in real life, where one place has a few different names, or one name refers to a few different places. I really like the study of toponymy, I think is what it's called, which is the study of place names. I really like, examples of, like, the word America, depending on the context, might refer to the United States, or it might refer to the entire Western Hemisphere, right? Like if somebody says, oh, Columbus discovered America, they're probably not talking about the U.S. They're talking about North and South America or whatever. And then there are examples of, somebody saying one thing when they really mean another. Like a lot of Americans will say Britain or British when they're talking about England specifically, which is technically incorrect, but that's just conventional, or Holland when they really mean the Netherlands. I really like examples of that. I think that's realistic, like it's very naturalistic for people to have names that are technically used incorrectly, but it's just convention. Another thing I find really interesting is endonyms and exonyms. So an endonym is the name of a place that is given to it by the people that live there. And an exonym is the opposite. It's the name for a place that is given to it by people who do not live there. So France, for example, in English we call it France, but in French they also call it France, but they'd say it with like a French accent. Say France. And in Spanish it's Francia, which is I think exactly the same in Italian. And then German, it's like basically the same thing. It's very German sounding, but it's the same. It's very similar. Germany is the complete opposite. We called Germany Germany, but the Germans called Germany Deutschland. And then the most people that speak Romance languages will call it something like Alemania. And then the Swedes, I think, call them Tyskland. And then the Poles, I do not remember what they call it. It starts with an N, Numski, something like that. It's got like 4 or 5 or 6 different names depending on which language you speak. And that's because Germany used to be comprised of like a lot of disparate Germanic tribes, and up until like the 19th century they were all disunified, or that's not a word, I don't think that's a word. They were not yet unified into a single country. And so most people, when Germany did unify, they just kind of referred to the country as the tribe that was most familiar to them. So most people that spoke Romance languages were more familiar with the Alemannic tribes, so they called it Alemania. And the Germans were, they just used the word for people, Deutsch, which just so happened to be the same word that the Dutch people used. So it's extra confusing if you speak English, because it sounds like it means Dutch when it really means German. So it's, things like that. It's just like it's like a really confusing mess of like the history of certain place names and names that refer to like nationalities or ethnicities or whatever, that I think is very interesting. And I think when designing a fantasy world, which is what I've always been trying to do with this world, I think it's fun to throw in a little bit of that confusion. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that village in particular, and to do so, I want to show off a project that is very old and very long term, and it's something that I've been hesitant to show off because I wanted to I wanted to be a little bit mysterious about this world and about all the lore, and I didn't want to get too like info dumpy about it, and this is going to be a little bit info dumpy. So down here is the map. This is the map of everything. Actually, I'm going to switch to this custom resource pack where literally the only thing I've changed is the texture for the glass in here, because it makes it just a little bit easier to see. We're going to wait for that. Okay, here we go. Beautiful. Look at that. And if I press F1, gorgeous. That's amazing. So you can already kind of see down here. This is the world as we know it. So over here, this is the relevant area right here. So down here, this is the Bunge. This is where we've been. That's the huge cow pit. That is the book factory. The tenement buildings. That's the few houses that I built over here. The inn, the church, and then up here is the Nameless Village. Now, is a beautiful, beautiful map right here, and it's fun to show off. But I actually, in order to better explain the history of the names that are used to describe that particular village, I want to use a slightly different map, and it is one that I drew up myself in Paint Tool Sci. So this one is well, actually I used a little bit of GIMP and then a little bit of Paint Tool Sci. I used GIMP to kind of color select all of the areas in the map to make it relief, to show off the relief. And then I went in and colored over it for the political boundaries here. It looks pretty cool. There are 3 really big countries. I think I kind of explained that in my last video when I was talking about the economy. But this is the map of the 3 countries, and over here, right here, that is where that's where the treatise is that defines these 3 countries. Now over here, this is the Bunge, and already you can notice a little bit of foreshadowing, I should say, because the Bunge technically only refers to this northernmost part over here. The map, by the way, puts west on top because it is like it's considered the holiest cardinal direction in the Payist faith. So they put west on top. At least in Pharisha, they prefer to put west on top. And so that's gonna, I think it looks better like this anyway. But you'll notice though, the Bunge refers to the northernmost part. The rest of this is technically not considered part of the Bunge, but conventionally a lot of people in this world will refer to this whole province as just the Bunge. The whole area as a whole, the whole, all 3 of these countries, and like the area in general, is usually something that I will refer to as Spruck. So anywhere in this map that you find yourself, as long as you're within these borders, you are in Spruck. But that term is a little bit contentious because in Pharisha, it usually just refers to kind of like this area. like the area around the mouth of the river. And that's kind of just because it's one of those terms that refers to a very specific place, and then that place expands, and the name sort of refers to the places that they've expanded into, but conservatively it refers to just the homeland, sort of. If you ask people from more or less this area, when they say Spruck, they're talking about this area right here. But if you ask, anybody else, they're usually referring to the whole area. Phaeacians, or forwarders in general, will sometimes prefer the more conservative definition. You'll notice that a lot of these areas use Spruck as a way to distinguish, this is the part of the country that is closest to Spruck. So burnt Spruck is essentially that's what Spruck referred to in the earliest history of this world, is it referred to this particular province. This is the province with the temple in it, and it was also the province with that really weird Sumerian looking inn that is right over here. You'll notice that the village that I talked about, and called the Nameless Village, the name that I give to it on this map, and it's the name that I use for most of my D&D campaigns when I do actually do that, which is not very often, is I call it the Spruckler Jep. And the reason for that is because this area right here, Spruck, is intersecting with this huge kind of landmass right here in between all of these bodies of water. I call this landmass the Jep. So it is the part of Spruck that intersects with the Jep. So it is the Spruckler Jep, which is a kind of a lazy name to a certain extent. It's like calling the Caucasus European Asia, it's a name that doesn't really. It's a name that doesn't really inspire a lot of pride, and so it's not a name that you'll usually hear in the region itself. A lot of the people that live here will refer to their home province as the Sprucklands, and that is a term that can sometimes refer to just this province here. Sometimes it also refers to burnt Spruck. Sometimes it refers to the Viouges out here. But it's it's just that's the term that they prefer to use for themselves. They identify, if you ask them what their nationality or what their ethnicity is, they would call themselves Sprucksters. But a lot of Ekeners who live, down east over here refer to these people as Jeplers because they live in the Jep, right? Which is another kind of funny term, because it usually doesn't refer to the Bunsters who live in the Bunge, even though they're, also on this landmass over here. It just refers to people from the Spruckler Jep. It also doesn't refer to anybody that lives kind of outside of the bounds of Spruck. So there's a village out here called the Midge, and I'm probably going to build one or two outposts kind of over here, up in the really high up west. But it really only refers to these folks over here. And it's kind of a misnomer. It's one of those weird words that people use, but they don't use it correctly. And I think that's kind of fun. I think it's fun that there's confusion. If you cross the entire length of this country. You know, you'll be called a Spruckler in some places, or a Spruckster, and then in other places you'll be called a Jepler. And it just like depends on who you're talking to. And I think that's kind of cool. It's a lot like how, you know, like I mentioned, America can refer to the country or to the continent. In Spanish specifically, usually when people just say America, they're referring to the continent. And they consider North and South America to be one continent. And so there's argument sometimes when people say like, oh, I'm from America, when they're speaking in Spanish, as like, you know, like an English speaking person. And they'll get like pushback saying, you know, like, no, we're all from America, you're from the US. And you know, it's one of those things that's kind of like, that's kind of, you know, I think that's kind of cool. I think that's kind of fun to learn about those sorts of things. You hear a lot about there are people that advocate that every country should be named based on the way people in the country call themselves, regardless of the language that you speak. And I think that's super cool. But you know, it's instances like that where it's like, oh, but that doesn't work in this language, you know, because it's confusing. And I think that's cool. I like those little bits of conflict. I like world building conflict into my single player Minecraft world. It makes it especially easy to come up with like quests when I do actually get people together and sit down and play a D&D campaign in this world. It makes it really fun to have all that conflict. It's very fun. Another term I wanted to talk about was this term Viouges. It is a word that is, I've got it anglicized to look kind of French, but regardless of the dialect, here, let me like, regardless of the dialect, it's actually spelled like this. Oh, there we go. It's spelled like that, Viouges. And you might be able to tell just by looking at it, but that is a cognate with the English word wild. It just means wilderness. And it usually refers to a forest, like a really dark forest, like the roofed forests that I get a lot of in this area. Typically, especially in the Jep, they're usually referring to these roofed forests right here. And so this whole area technically is the Viouges, if you're pronouncing it correctly. But this is the part of the Viouges which is like in Spruck, the more conservative definition, or it's close to Spruck. This they would probably call the Jepler Viouges. And then there's another roofed forest over here, which you might call the Ekener Viouges, because it's close to the Eken. Although most people from the Crescent, which is this whole area right here, most Crescentier forwarders don't care much for the term. They pronounce it a little bit differently too. They would say the Viouges. And usually when they say that, they're just referring to unpopulated areas in general. So this kind of plateau over here, which has no trees and has no forests, they would call that a Viouge or a Viouge. But the people in the Jep, they would only refer to this area as the Viouge. They would not refer to this as the Viouge. So that's kind of a cool neat. Oh, Eken is a cool place name, because I've got a lot of place names in the Crescent that are basically like exactly the same, but they're just pronounced differently. So the crescent is populated by a lot of different people. This is in Okuna, the city over here. That's where the treatise was signed, and so all three nations converge on that city, and they all were given a part of the city to claim. So the northern part went to Vinland. This southern part right here, the Forder quarter, went to Pharisha, and the eastern part down here went to the Slaim. And they all called their provinces Okuna, basically, but they called it Okuna in their own language. The original name for Okuna was Ekin. So we've got over here former and latter, which is, this was the part of Ekin that was built first, and then this is the part that was built second. And they use former and latter because eastern and western is kind of like, they don't like using the word west very much because it's like a very holy, right? Again, that's why I put west on top, because it's a holy direction, like that's where the land of the gods is. It's way, way up west, above us mere mortals. Saying that you're from the west is like saying you're God. So it's like, they don't like that. So instead of saying east and west, they say, oh, this part was built first, this part was built second. So that's kind of a fun little bit of trivia. But anyway, Ekin was the name of this area at first. It was the part. It was the name, I think, was originally like equine, because there were like horses there, and I wanted to give it like a horsey sort of name, so I called it Equine Spruck, and that was the original name for it. In fact, basically every area, it was only Burnt Spruck, Ekin Spruck, and Slaim Spruck. Those were the three provinces of the old kind of settlement right here. It was just this was, when I was in middle school, that was what comprised this area. There was no Vinland yet. And so eventually this kind of, I changed the way I pronounced it, just naturally, without even like worrying. It was actually before I started working on the conlangs. And I just eventually, I changed the way that I pronounced it and the way that I spelled it to a certain extent. And some really old maps that I drew, I would spell it like this. And then now I've kind of settled on this specific spelling because it makes more sense within the language itself to have that CK in there. And so they just call it the Ekin, or Deccan, if you're going to say it in Pharishan. So that is what the Pharishan part of the crescent is called, is Deccan. Now, Vinland, they speak a language which is one of my least favorite. I haven't touched it in quite some time. I haven't built much in Vinland in a moment because I've been focusing so much on developing Pharisha. But Vinland, I wanted to try doing like a vowel harmony sort of thing in there, and I didn't know what I was doing when I started it, so it's a not very naturalistic vowel harmony system that they've got. But I like the idea of them pronouncing Ekin or Ekini like two different ways, like depending on which of the two classes of vowels they were using. So it would be Ekini if they're using like the more native Pharishan vowels, or Okuni if they're doing I guess back vowels. That's how I decided. So they could call it Ekini or Okuni. So they eventually settled on the latter. They started calling it Okunu, and it became kind of conventional to refer to the Finnish part of this city as Okuna, because that's how they pronounced it, or more or less how they pronounced it. So Ekin is the forwarder part, and Okuna is the Vinnish part. And then the Slaimblers came in to settle their part, and they were greeted with all this confusion of the two states that had settled there first, because of the way that the forwarders kind of pronounce their vowels a little bit differently. They pronounce O's with a kind of like a strut vowel, like and then O's they pronounce like O. So they would pronounce in their own language. They call that province Akon, and that's just how they pronounce the Vinnish quarter, is Akon. So you've got Deccan and Akon, and the Slaimblers would hear, because the Vins were kind of the ones that won the territorial dispute over the city, which was part of what motivated the treatise in the first place. But because the city as a whole was usually just referred to as Okuna, the Slaimblers came in and they would hear the forwarders pronouncing it Akon, and so they called it Okona in their own language. And so the Slaimbler quarter is called Okona within, the Slaimbler kind of system. They call their part Okona because that's what the crescent as a whole is kind of called, is Okona, at least in Slaimbler. It's called Ekin in Phoenicia and Okuna in Vinland, but it's gotten to a point where, people have forgotten the etymology to such an extent that they just use these three terms to refer to the three different sections. And I think that's kind of cool. I think that's a neat sort of thing. It reminds me to a certain extent of like a lot of Celtic tribes all have like kind of the same name. Like there's France used to be called Gaul, and there was a Galicia, and then there's a Galicia, I think, and the Scots and the Irish would call themselves Gaelga. And I'm pretty sure, I didn't look it up, I'm pretty sure that's all just the same word. I think the Celts in general just called themselves Gauls, and just depending on which part of the world they were in, or part of Europe, they just had a different way of pronouncing that, and those different pronunciations became just the names of those areas. And they became different enough that people just use those different accents or different pronunciations as the place names in general, which is cool. I like that, and that's how I named those three parts of the crescent specifically. Part of why it's so easy to come up with new names that sound cool and that all kind of mirror one another is because of the fact that I have these languages that I've developed over the years. But before that, I had kind of a hard time coming up with names. Most of these, to tell you the truth, are literally just like I came up with a name within the language and then I anglicized it. So Dudry Bank is literally just Phoenician for the other bank. So this is their side, and then this is the other side. So it's the other bank, and in Phoenician that is Dudry. Dudry is how they pronounce it. Dudry. And then Doft Spruck. Doft is just like, that's kind of like when you see like a Scottish person and their name starts with Mick or Muck. In Phoenicia, a lot of people, or in specifically this area right here, a lot of people have family names that start with Doft, and so they called this area Doft Spruck, because a lot of people here call themselves Doft. I think I had a Doft Jep and a Doft Birdrin, Doft Birdrin, and that was a guy that had chickens, so they called that family the chicken family, and it is a de of de, and then ofte got contracted to oft, and then de oft became Doft. It literally means the of the, which is redundant, but it felt naturalistic to me. It felt like something people would say. The people of the is basically what it means. Those of the. Doft. So, and then there was this one I really love. The Fisher family is called Doft Pjuft. And that's how you pronounce that, because the GH got silent over time, so it's like pronounced like that. But you wouldn't think that that's how it's pronounced when you look at it. But it's like a historical spelling, so it's Doft Pjuft. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, what was I talking about? Before I had started these conlangs, it's very easy to come up with names like that when you've got conlangs, and it's easy to just like take a word from it, and that word sounds like the name of a place, But before I did that, I had to come up with names for some of these places. And a lot of the really early names have kind of stupid etymologies in retrospect. Like the word Spruck itself is literally just like, I liked the idea of the earliest settlers who came from way up west over here. They had a lot of taiga biomes around them, so they had like spruce wood, but they did not have dark oak wood. And so I like the idea of maybe instead of calling it dark oak, they called it dark spruce, because spruce was the darkest wood that they had ever seen, and so they just assumed that it was like a type of spruce wood. And so they called it like burnt spruce, and then the pronunciation changed or whatever, or maybe it was pronounced differently at a different point in time, and the C was pronounced with a harder sound, so it was like Spruck, and so that's how I got the word Spruck, as it's I guess it's a cognate with the word spruce, which is funny because there's no spruce trees in this area except for like over here in Brona. That's the only place within Spruck where you can find spruce trees. But the dark oak wood trees, that's what they called those dark spruce, and eventually, because they started pronouncing it Spruck, eventually they just started referring to them as Spruckwood trees. And in most languages they're called something like Spruck. And the actual spruce trees, they just call them brown trees. Brunwoj, I think. Brunwoj is how you call it in Phoenician. Finnish, it's Brunwoj. What would you call it in Slambler? It would just be like Brunwoj. They're all basically the same. The difference is more in the grammar than it is in the vocabulary. I'm going to be honest. What else did I want to talk about? There were a lot of names that I'd come up with from portmanteaus. Like I'd take like two things that were distinct about a location, and I'd just mash them together, and like I'd rearrange the letters until it looked like a word that nobody had ever heard of before, but I knew that it came from something specific. Like Slaim, like when I first settled on this island in the swamp, this is a swamp biome out here, I wanted clay and I wanted slime. So I took the word for clay and the word for slime, and I just mashed them together. So I guess I took the vowel from clay and put it into the word slime. So instead of slime, it was slaim, and that's just the word for the entire country now is just the Slaim. And the island specifically that I expanded out from is just called Slaim Island. And then the rest of them are just words from the specific languages. Bondraïl is a really cool one. That's actually the origin of the word bunge. It's just kind of a Phoenician way of it's like a shortened and it's made to sound like a place name within the Phoenician language. But the word Bondraïl in Slambler is Isle of Bones. Bondraïl. I don't know if it's easy to see on there, but that eel is isle, and Bondra is the word bone, and then I added this, that's a genitive affix, so it makes it like a possessive, so like bones isle, basically, is kind of how that works grammatically. But it's the same thing with Spidellendra. In Slambler, that means Isle of Spiders, because like right here, there is underneath this spot there was a skeleton dungeon, and then there was a spider dungeon, and they were both like right next to each other. And so this area right here is just one province where it's just like those two farms, and they're so close together that they're connected underground. It's kind of awesome. But this island right here, even though it's way outside the province, is often just called Spidellendra Island. The forwarders, much like they took the word Bondraïl and kind of shortened it and made it kind of sound like a place name by calling, their outstretch of the pathway to Bondraïl in the Jep, they call it the Bunge. They took the name Spidellendra, and this entire island in Phoenician is called Delenge, which in the anglicized form would look like that. If I was showing this to like my D&D group, I would probably spell it like that, but within Phoenician, it would be spelled like that, Delenge. Anytime you see an accent like this, that means that there is a D or a T, and you're going to turn it into an affricate. So if you see a D, you pronounce it J. If you see a T, you pronounce it Ch. So that's if you watched that one video where I was reading the book from the church, and you were wondering like what the pronunciation was, or what the deal was with the T's and the D's, or what the deal was with the accents. That's it. I don't know if there's anything else that I want to talk about. I think that's I've rapped and rambled. I've rambled on for quite some time. I kind of just wanted to turn the camera on and talk. And if you stuck around this long, thank you. It's I rarely get people to stick around this long to listen to this crap. This is my life's work here. This is I know this is kind of nerd stuff, but it's a creative outlet for me. I'd like to keep making videos But I don't know what to make videos about. I kind of like this low effort stuff. I kind of like going in with that much of a plan, but I don't know that it's very fun to watch. Anyway, if there's anything that draws your interest, I guess, in particular, about like the lore, I could, I could go like in depth, into something real specific, and maybe you guys would think that's cool. I think that's about it. I think that's all I have to say. So thank y'all for watching. I'll see you some other time.